Haplogroup J equals Japheth, Part 2. But before we get too deep into the video, first I want to tell you guys about my social media platforms. So I have a Clubhouse account, and we can actually talk to one another on it. I also host Clubhouse rooms every now and then where I might talk about history and genetics of the Middle East and Africa. I have a Twitter page, a Facebook account, and a Facebook page, as well as a Instagram, all titled The Hebrew of Israel. And what I typically do on these platforms is post upcoming videos as well as slides for my presentations. And so just be on the lookout for all of that on my social media platforms. And if you want to support me financially for the channel, you can look at my Patreon as well as my PayPal and my GoFundMe. And with all of that out of the way, let's begin with the video. The Nakh, Ingish, and Chechenian. We discussed about the Ingish and the Chechenian separately, but now let's learn about them holistically. These people being known or referred to as the Nakh. So the Nakh peoples today, partly also known as the Vanak peoples, are the speakers of the Vanak languages. These are chiefly the ethnic Chechenian, Ingish, and Bats peoples of the North Caucasus, including closely related minor or historical groups. The Nakh languages are a group of languages within Northeast Caucasian family, spoken chiefly by the Chechenians and Ingish in the North Caucasus. So here's the region where it's been spoken. All of these peoples simply called Nakh, Chechnya, Dagestan, etc. The Chechenian, Ingish, and Bats peoples are also grouped under the ethno-linguistic umbrella of Nakh peoples. The Nakh language were historically classified as an independent North Central Caucasian family, but are now recognized as a branch of the Northeast Caucasian family. The separation of the Nakh from common Northeast Caucasian has been tentatively dated to the Neolithic 4th millennium BC. Igor Dankov and Sergei Starstrom have suggested that Nakh is distinctly related to Urartu, which they included as a branch of the Northeast Caucasian language family, which are dubbed Alordian languages by Dankov. The Vanak have been referred to by various names, including Durzuks in medieval Arab, Georgian, and Armenian ethnogeography. Historical linguists, including Genealogical, have connected ancestral Nakh languages and their distinct relatives to a Neolithic migration from the Fertile Crescent. Another view, not necessarily contradicting the previous one, posits a migration of Nakh into their present location in the North Caucasus during the Classical era, following the collapse of Urartu. So basically, two views: one, the Nakh peoples coming from the Fertile Crescent way in ancient times during the Neolithic, or coming from, the Urartu civilization. But like they said, both could be true. The Vanak Chechenian English dialect continuum. The Chechenian people are a Caucasian native ethnic group, and the English people are a Caucasian native ethnic group of the North Caucasus, mostly inhabiting the Russian Republic of Ingushtania. According to the opinion of Caucasus folklorist Abjad Jonenica, it is certain that the Nakh constituted an important component of the Hurrian Urartian tribes in the Trans-Caucasus and played a role in the development of their influential cultures. It has been noted that at many points, Urartu in fact extended through Haik into the North Caucasus. Jononica notes in his book, The kingdom of Urartu which was made up of several small states, flourished in the 9th and 7th centuries BCE and extended into the North Caucasus at the peak of its power. Uratriist Paul Zemensky argues that the Uratrians likely originally hailed from Iraq and likely merely constituted a small ruling class. Now that's very interesting. His view, basically, these Uratrians coming from Iraq and Mesopotamia. So Genealogical notes that the first confirmed appearance of a consolidated Vanak nation in the North Caucasus, spanning the range the Zengi would later have, with a few additions later, as after the fall of Urartu, and notes that numerous people think that they were a regathering of Nakh tribes fleeing the crumbling state. The ancient Greek chronicler Strabo mentioned that mythical Georgians had migrated from Eastern Asia, Asia Minor, i.e. Urartu, to the North Caucasus. Dromnica notes that Georgians is one of many Nakh roots, Gurga meaning in fact, kindred, in Proto-Nakh. The discussion of their origins is intertwined with the discussion of the mysterious origins of the Nakh peoples as a whole. The only 3 surviving Nakh peoples are Chechens, English, and Bats, but they are thought by some scholars to be the remnants of what was once a larger family of peoples, which I would agree, by the way. There are thoughts to either be descendant from original settlers of the Caucasus, north and or south, or supposedly Nakh-speaking ethnic minorities in the northeastern regions of the ancient state of Urartu, whose people also spoke a language that was possibly related to the Nakh languages. The 2 theories are not mutually incompatible, and there has been much evidence that seems to link the 2, either by dual origins or a return theory in which the Nakh peoples originally lived in the Caucasus, migrated down to the south, lived there for a long period of time, and then returned to the Caucasus, which also is highly plausible. I think that will make a lot of sense as well. So this is a source, an English translation that was originally in Russian, dealing with the English and the Chechenian peoples in connection to them with the Uratrian and the Hurrians. So it says, the Uratrians themselves, or Alurdians, called their country and state Belensli, from which comes the modern name of Lake Van, in the basin of which the center of this state was located since ancient times. Uratrian Alurdian tribes, akin to the Hurrian population of the countries to the southwest of Lake Van, lived around Lake Van and in adjacent areas. The Uratrian as well as the Hurrian language belong to a special linguistic family among the modern languages. The closest to them are some languages of the North Caucasus, Chechenian and English. So basically, Uratrian and Hurrian, they're very similar to Chechenian and English of today. And here's another source. This is actually in German, though. English translation dealing with Hurrian, Uratrian, and the Vanak peoples. So it says, the long-standing assumption about the connections of Hurrian and Uratrian with the Caucasian languages have received serious confirmation thanks to the collected correspondences identified in the Northeast Caucasian languages, and especially in the Vanak. And of course, Vanak is Chechen, English, and Bats peoples. And this is another source from Russia, English translation, dealing with the Chechens and the English with Urartu. And by the way, I always have the source highlighted that comes from highlighted in blue and the ISNB number so you can find it. So it says the most ancient state on the territory of our country was the Urartuan kingdom in the Trans-Caucasus. The word Urartu, the memory of it is preserved in the name of Mount Ararat, is Assyrian, but the inhabitants themselves called their country Belin-Lili, hence Lake Van. And excuse me for my mispronunciation. The Aldrian or Urartuan tribes living around this lake, who spoke a language that has not survived to this day, of the modern ones, Chechenian and English, are the closest to it. Back in the 13th century BC, created their own tribal unity. So basically it's saying that, again, English and Chechenian peoples being related and closely linked to Urartuans. And this is a Russian translation of this source dealing with Chechens, English, and Hurrians and Urartuans. And basically it just says, of the peoples existing in our time, the Chechens and English are the closest to the Hurrian and Urartian in terms of language. And so here is a map just displaying Urartian peoples. And as these sources say, basically south of the Caucasus, bleeding into parts of Iran, northern Iran, and Anatolia. And it's pretty much north of Mesopotamia. And these are Caucasian peoples, non-Semitic, non-Indo-European peoples that were quite widespread in the Near East, which is fairly interesting. So here's a great book. I advise that you read this book if you want to learn more about the English and the Chechenian and these Vanik peoples, these Nakh peoples of the Caucasus. It has a wealth of information if you want to learn more about them. So it says, on the other hand, by the way, the book is called The Chechenians, a Handbook. This is by Abjad Gemakona. And it says, on the other hand, the North Caucasian perspective goes back to the most ancient of Caucasian cultures, dating back to more than 5 millennium ago. For thousands of years, the Vanik lived in the North Caucasus, lived in their North Caucasian domicile, which waxed and waned as invaders came and went, but was preserved more or less interact due to the nation's remarkable tendency. Linguistic evidence ties Vanik culture to the ancient Hurrian and Urartian civilizations that flourished in the Near East a few millennium ago. The Nakh also contributed an important element in the Neolithic Kura-Araxes culture in the Trans-Caucasus. It may be useful to construct a virtual model of Proto-North Caucasian culture that does not necessarily imply or deny a common root, but presupposes at least some active cultural interaction at some points in the histories of the North Caucasian peoples, say at the age of the great cultures, Mayakope, Mito, Sindika, Kura-Araxes, and others. The term Nakh peoples refers to the Chechenians, English, Kites, and Tovos Tush, Bats, all of whom speak languages of the Nakh branch of Northeast Caucasian and share common descent and culture. Vanik history is perhaps the most poorly studied among those of the various peoples of the North Caucasus. For example, up to the end of the 19th century, archaeologists in general consider that the North Caucasians settled in their present domicile during the Iron Age, at most 3,000 years ago. E. V. Den Beum, citing Stone Age evidence, argued that their settlement took place much earlier. Through Evidence of Nakh settlement was found on the southern slopes of the Caucasus in the 2nd and 1st millennium BC. He did not rule out the possibility of their residence in the north and eastern regions of the Caucasus. It is traditionally accepted that the Vanak have existed in the Caucasus with their present territory as a nucleus of a larger domicile for thousands of years, and that it was a birthplace of their ethnos, to which the peoples who inhabited the central Caucasus and the steppe lands all the way to the Volga in the North Caucasus and the Caspian Sea to the east contributed. Some authorities believe that the Nakh nation was an offspring of the Hurrians and the Urartians, builders of magnificent civilizations in the Near East that had profound influences upon other cultures of the region. And that's extremely true and extremely important. The Hurrians and the Urartians, specifically the Hurrians, are very important people to study when it comes to the ancient Near East. And we'll actually cover them in later videos, but that quote is extremely true, that the Hurrians and the Urartians were the builders of magnificent civilizations in the Near East and had a profound influence upon other cultures of the region. That's very true. Anyways, it says, it is certain that the Nakh constituted an important component of the Hurrian Urartian tribes in the Transcaucasus and played a role in the development of their influential cultures. E.A. Spencer in 1941 suggested that the Transcaucasus was the original Hurrian homeland. Some scholars have proposed the existence of a linguistic and cultural Northeast Caucasian and Hurrian or Urartian spatial continuum. So now dealing with the Kura-Araxes culture. The Kura-Araxes culture, called after the river valleys in the Transcaucasus were excavated, revealed its remains extended from the 4th/3rd millennium BC to the early Bronze Age. It was one of the major civilizations of its time, on a par with those of Mesopotamia, with which it established trade routes. This culture is considered indigenous to the Caucasus, and one of its important variants is believed to have established by the ancestors of the Nakh Dagestanis. It is believed that the Hurrian civilization gave rise to the Transcaucasus Neolithic culture, which later spread to parts of Asia Minor and the Middle East. So this is a map of the Kura-Araxes culture, and as I said, it is in the Caucasus, south of the Caucasus, where Hurrians and Urartians would spawn from, and of course where Chechnyan and English people will spawn from as well. So continuing with the book, it says the Kura-Araxes was contiguous and had mutual influences with the Mayakote culture in the Northwest Caucasus. According to E.I. Karupnov in 1967, there were elements of the Mayakote culture in the early memorials of Chechnya and Ingushtania, in the Mikan and Bumut Kyrgyzs, and in Legovy and Sarzun Urit. The economy of the Kura-Araxes culture was based on agriculture and cattle breeding. Contacts were maintained with the highland tribes of Western Asia and Asia Minor, according to Karupnov. And the pottery talking about the Kura-Araxes pottery, the pottery had a dark and polished surface in the North Caucasus with a red color. So the people's the most probable theory of Nakh ancestry is that it was the reunion of the Caucasian Nakh, the location of whose original domicile is still a moot point. And some of the Urartian remnants of the breakup of the kingdom of Urartu, with the Trans-Caucasus being the most likely locality at which this fusion took place. It is thought that the Proto-Caucasian Nakh and Proto-Hurrian had common ancestry. Thus, at least part of the genealogy of the Nakh peoples can be attributed to the Hurrians and their descendants, the Urartians, which is very, very interesting. Anyways, from Hurrians to modern Vanak, there were many nation tribes that can be viewed as forming connecting links in the genealogical chain. Some Urartian tribes were incorporated into other peoples, but the Vanak and Tushins resisted assimilation and are considered as the only linguistic and ethnic remnants of the Urartian and Hurrians. Despite the obscurity of their origins, the Hurrians became one of the great and influential peoples of the Near East from the 3rd millennium BC to the 14th century BC. Again, very true, and keep that in mind. Anyways, their original homeland was probably the South Caucasus down to the Armenian Plateau and the Zagros-Tartarus Mountains. Later, they expanded to Anatolia, Mesopotamia, and northern Syria. The Hurrian language was neither Indo-European nor Semitic, but it was akin to the Northeast Caucasian languages, or Aldrian languages, descendants of Urartian, including Chechenian and Luezgian. Hurrian civilization reached its acme in the period of the 16th and 14th century BC. The generally accepted date for the downfall of Hurrian civilization is 1365 BC. The numerous clans of the Hurrians, such as the Gutis, Hattians, Kassites, established the Kassite kingdom of Babylon in the 15th century BC. The Kurdi, or Proto-Kurds, Mitannis, Mushki, and Urartians formed empires and city-states which bore their names. The Kura-Araxes culture is also attributed to the Hurrians. It is generally accepted that a number of small Hurrian states gradually united to form the Empire of Mitanni. The Hurrians were so ubiquitous that many Indo-Iranian and Indo-European peoples are believed to have substantive Hurrian contributions in their ethnogenesis. For example, the Kurds consider themselves and their culture as descendants of the Hurrians and their civilization, despite linguistic differentiation. There are also suggestions that the ancestors of the Armenians were a mixture of Hurrians and Indo-European Persians. However, linguistic evidence suggests that the Northeast Caucasians are the genuine descendants of the Hurrians. The Empire of Mitanni appeared in 1550 BC, probably as the southwest of the Armenian Plateau, and was made up at least partially of Hurrian subjects, although there is some indication that the ruling classes was of Indo-European extraction. Hurrian was used as the language of state. Mitanni annexed Assyria in 1472 BC. The Mitanni culture, a unique blend of native Hurrian traditions and Sumerian and Akkadian cultural inputs, had in no small measure influenced the civilizations of the Hittites and other peoples. The Mitannis perfected the two-wheeled war chariot, which had such a large impact on warfare from the 15th century BC. Mitanni was undone in the 13,000 BC after having been subjected first to the Hittite and then Assyrian attacks. And so here's the region of the Mitanni, and here is where the Hurrians would be, overlapping them, and here's where the future Urartu would be. So they're all generally in the northern Mesopotamian region. So the Chechenian English Kists, considered by some authors as a divergent dialect of Chechenian, and Tovos Tushnian or Bats make up the Nakh branch of the Nakh Dangestani or Northeast Caucasian language family, which comprise more than 30 languages, most of which are spoken in Dagestan. The language group is indigenous to the Caucasus and is comparable in age to Indo-European. The split of the Nakh branch from the rest of the family took place about 5,000 through 6,000 years ago. J. Nichols proposed that the Nakh Dangestani language family is long indigenous to the Caucasus, suggested by fairly similar archaeological continuity for the last 8,000 years or more in central Dagestan. This is also reinforced by the distribution of loanwords from ancient Mesopotamia into early Nakh Dangestani. The structure of the Nakh Dangestani family tree, with the greatest divergence within and between branches lying in their southern reaches, would suggest that pre-Proto-Nakh Dangestanis spread into the Caucasus from the southwest. A cuneiform style of writing and runic type inscriptions are found on ancient monuments in Chechnya, some dating back to the 3rd millennium BC. However, no serious work has been done to interpret them. Nakh has roots that can be traced to some languages of ancient Mesopotamia. There is a general consensus that the Hurrian, Urartu, and Nakh Dangestani language families are connected. I. M. Dankoff and S. A. Sarstrin in 1986 have demonstrated more than 100 common roots between the two language groups. And so again, here's just a map of these peoples and languages, just to reinforce it. And here's another book dealing with the Nakh peoples. This is the Vanaks, the Chechenian, and English. And so it says, this book is about the Chechenians and English, a kindred nation of the North Caucasus. The Chechenians and English have common origin and similar language and culture, but owing to the forces of historical coincidence and circumstances, they have developed into the separate nations who, nevertheless, are fully aware of their unity and apart from their national self names, the Nokchi Chechenians and the Galgi English have their common name Veneks, i.e. our people. From the linguistic point of view, their languages mainly belong to the three lingual families: Caucasian proper, or Paleo-Caucasian, Indo-European, and Altian. The Caucasian family is divided into three groups: Western, Eastern, and Southern. The representatives of the Caucasian family are the ancient inhabitants of the Caucasus. This accounts for the term Paleo-Caucasian, related to each other by common origin. The Western group consists of two subgroups, the Abagay and Abzak, the Abazin branches. The Abagay or Circean, one of the most numerous and far famed peoples of the Caucasus, still densely populated a vast territory from the Black Sea coast to the Middle Terek, as far back as the first half of the 19th century. The eastern branch of the Caucasian languages also divides into two subgroups, the Vanak and the Dangestani branches. The Vanaks, as is generally known, is a collective name of the Chechenians and English. It should be noted that the area of spread of the Paleo-Caucasian languages gradually growing narrower for the space of epochs. Several millennia ago, the tribe speaking the Caucasian languages apparently inhabited not only the whole Caucasus or the most of its parts, but also the areas out far of its limits. According to some scientists, certain nations of the ancient Near East, including the Goths, Hottians, Proto-Hottians, the Cassians, Hurrians, Uratrians, and others, were ethnically close to different branches of the Paleo-Caucasian family. proceeded from this, the Paleo-Caucasians, i.e. Aborigines of the places and settlements of alien tribes, took part in ethnology of the majority of peoples inhabiting the Caucasus today and speaking the languages of Indo-European and Turkic system. This is also confirmed by anthropological data. As early as the 4th to the 1st centuries BC, the Caucasus was one of the entries of highly developed bronze metallurgy. In the North Caucasus and Transcaucasia are found the burials of tribal nobility through the 3rd and 2nd centuries BC, containing the richest jewelry, gold plates, silverware, weapons. Archaeological data shows sufficiently high level of societal and cultural development in the Caucasus between the 3rd to the 1st centuries BC. The influences of ancient civilizations of Mesopotamia and Anatolia on the culture of the Caucasian tribes of the Bronze Age is evident. On the other hand, one can observe the cultural influences of the Caucasus on vast regions of Western Europe. Urartu was an ancient state in the Caucasus, 9th to the 4th centuries BC, comprising a vast region of South Transcaucasia. The native tongue of the capital of the state apparently was close to the Vanak-Dangstani linguistic group. When discussing the matter of the origin of Vanaks, it is also very important to take into consideration their genetic affiliation to the eastern branch of the Caucasian ethno-linguistic family. According to some scientists, the tribes speaking the Eastern Caucasian Vanak-Dangstani and the languages cognate to them inhabited not only the eastern part of the North Caucasus and Transcaucasia, but also the territory in Front Asia, right up to Zagros, Mesopotamia, Syria, and Asia Minor, quite possibly penetrating into certain islands of the Mediterranean. In particular, the thesis of kinship of ancestors of the Vanak-Dangstani peoples with the Hurrians and Urartians, the cultural nations of ancient times who formed the powerful states of the ancient Near East in the 2nd and 1st millennia BC, carries more conviction, as it is supposed the Proto-Hurrian Urartian and other Eastern Caucasian languages are related to each other nearly the same way as the ancient written languages of Indo-European family. So here is the Hurrian. Here's just another map displaying it. If you type in Hurrian map, it will basically show this general area of the northern Mesopotamia, but southern Caucasus. Here's another great book to read about the English and the Chechenians. It's called The Origin of the Chechenian and English, a study in Alpine linguistic and ethnic geography. And basically it just says, with this introduction, the Chechenians and their western neighbors, the English, are distinct ethnic groups with distinct languages, but so closely related and so similar that it is convenient to describe them together. Chechenian and English, together with Bats and Tovostush, a minority language of Georgia, make up the Nakh branch of the Nakh-Dangstani or Northeast Caucasian language family. The split of the Nakh branch from the rest of the family took place about 5,000 through 6,000 years ago. Thus, the Nakh-Dangstani family is comparable in age to Indo-European, the language family ancestral to English, French, Russian, Greek, Hindi, etc. Though the split of the Chechenian English probably dates back to the Middle Ages. And so again, just showing a map of the Hurrian and these Caucasian language families like Northwest, Northeast Caucasian, Haik, etc. And here's another great book dealing with Hurrian specifically and connection to the Chechenian and the English. This is from ancient Anatolia. And it says, Oxford handbook, by the way. And it says the Hurrian as a whole shared a yet earlier common ancestor with most of the numerous and comparatively obscure languages of the Caucasus is not improbable. Modern Caucasian languages are conventionally divided into southern, northwestern, and northeastern families. Georgian, for example, belongs to the southern family. Dankoff and Starstrand, in the most thorough attempt to finding a linkage yet published, have argued that Hurrian is a branch of the Eastern Caucasian family. This would make it a distinct relative of such modern languages as Chechenian, Avar, Lak, and Uyd. And so here is basically in yellow Hurrian, and here is in orange Urartu. This is the people in the language in the time period of 1800 BC. So we have talked about a lot dealing with the English and the Chechen peoples, also known as the Nakh peoples. And basically they are a Northeast Caucasian people. And they are associated with ancient cultures of the Caucasus like the Kura-Araxes culture. Furthermore, they have associations with the ancient Hurrians and the Urartu civilizations, and they may have spoken a Urartu language. With all of that being said, this seems to line up genetically when it comes to Haplogroup J, because Haplogroup J in ancient times is associated with the Kura-Araxes culture, Northeast Caucasians, and Urartuans. Furthermore, in modern times, Haplogroup J is seen highest in these exact Caucasian groups. This is from How Eurasia Was Born, and it says, the Northeast Caucasian language family seems to show clear links to ancient Eastern Anatolia, as most subclades of J1-Z1842 can be linked to the Armenian highlands in present-day Azerbaijan, precisely fitting the exact location of the Kura-Araxes culture. Three subclades of its J1-ZS3042, J1-ZS5658, J1-ZS2872, and J1-Y535 are widespread among Northeast Caucasian groups, suggesting Northeast Caucasian languages to have originated from the Kura-Araxes culture. As ancient J1 subclades also seem to have been present in the ancient Levant as well. This supports the existence of the Alduian language family, linking Hurrian to Northeast Caucasian. Regarding the Northwest Caucasian language family, broader analysis of other genetic components by Yunbesvi confirmed that Northwest Caucasian populations also originated from south of the Caucasus, thus from within the cradle of the Neolithic Middle East. This also supports their supposed relations to the Indo-European family, and suggests that their homeland must have been in the close proximity with that of the Indo-European homeland in the Eastern Anatolia. On the other hand, it may have been west of the Northeast Caucasian homeland, as the latter seems to have covered the entire Kura-Araxes culture area. The presence of J2-M67 in Northwest Caucasian populations also points to the origins south of the Caucasus, although as J2-M67 is present in human populations belonging to both Northwest Caucasian and Northeast Caucasian language groups, it is somewhat ambiguous to which language family did the population that introduced it in the region belong to. Now, it's basically everything we just read when it comes to the earlier studies dealing with the Northeast Caucasian, Kura-Araxes, Hurrians. These populations, these peoples would have had J markers. Everything that lines up anciently, and as I said, even dealing with modern populations, they would have been J markers as well. This paper, Parallel Evolution of Genes and Languages in the Caucasus region, says again, haplogroup J2, A4B star dash M67 comprised 51 through 79% of the Y chromosomes in the English and three Chechnyan populations, Northeast Caucasus Nakh linguistic group. Finally, J1 star dash M267 comprised 44 through 99% of the Avar, Dargins, the Kakians, the Kubachi, and the Legusians, Northeast Caucasus, Dargian linguistic, or the Dagestan linguistic group. So these Nakh Dagestan populations have the highest amount of haplogroup J, J1 and J2. And linguistically and genetically, the Y DNA tree of J and the Caucasian populations actually do basically overlap with one another. Their divergence in their time perfectly matches when it comes to all of it. So that's also another interesting fact when dealing with these Caucasian populations from a genetic tree and linguistic tree perspective. So combining genetic and linguistic findings, we now propose a model of the evolution of the Caucasus populations. The final tree was obtained by merging the genetic clusters with the background linguistic tree. We conclude that the Caucasus gene pool originated from a subset of the Near Eastern pool due to an Upper Paleolithic or Neolithic migration, followed by the significant genetic drift, probably due to isolation in the extremely mountainous landscape. So there's a perfect overlap, which is very, very interesting. Now, we also see, like I said, dealing with the Y chromosome haplogroups, that these Caucasian populations have some of the highest amounts, going up to 99% among the English, Chechnyans, Bats, Avars, Durgians, etc. You can see it right here. This is J-M304, its branches J-M267 and J-M172. And you see right here with the English and the Chechnyans, and then you see it right here with the Ayavars and Durgians and others. And here's just another visual representation with J1, and here are the references up to 98%, 99%, basically 100% among these Caucasian populations. And again, J2, here are the references, and seen very high in these Caucasian populations, up to 87%. It's very important, very interesting. So the phenotype of the Nakh, or the English and Chechnyan, seems to belong to the Armenoid type according to anthropology, I would say. This is from the Venax book and the Chechnyan and the English, and it says the Caucasian type is spread in the regions of the Great Caucasus on both sides of the range. People of this type are of large stature, broad-faced, and color of the eyes and the hair with a considerable touch of light tints, though prevail the dark-haired, round-headed. The Caucasian type is prevalent with the Kura-Araxes, the Barakians, the Ossets, Veneks, Western Dagestanis, and the Mountainer Georgians, the Slavans, the Mostrovis, and the Karasurs, and others. And this is a Russian translation dealing with basically the same thing, the phenotype of the English and the Chechnyans. So it says, the anthropology of Chechnyans and English is somewhat different. The English belong to the central cluster of the Caucasian Minpeb or Minteb anthrotype, with pronounced bralicoscephalization, which indicates a strong mixing with the Koban culture, whereas the Chechnyans, although they belong mainly to the Caucasus, the Mitebids, combine many elements of the Caspian and even the Puntid. All this testifies that the Chechenians, to a greater extent, have preserved the Hurrian substream. So looking at Chechenians is like looking at an ancient Hurrian. But anyways, so here is the embedded type. That's the best way I pronounce that. The group is the Alpinide, the Armenoid, and the Drenid. Basically, the regional type of the Caucasus Mountains, the embedids, are typical of the Georgian population and common among Chechenians and English. And this is why I chose this image. Physical traits is light brown skin, straight or wavy, usually brown hair, brachycephalic. And here's basically the region that they're in. Like I said, the Caucasus. So this is sort of like the general phenotype of these peoples. So it is very clear that Caucasian groups are important to our studies when understanding the phenotype, the genotype, and the history of the ancient and even the modern Near East. So this is where we end the Nakh, the English, and the Chechenian. The Nakh, Sumerians, and Haplogroup J. What I find fascinating about the Nakh peoples, like the Chechenians and the English, is that they have an oral tradition that they come from the Fertile Crescent in Mesopotamia to the Caucasus. However, this oral account may be true and provable through the works of anthropology. The Chechenians are one of the Nakh peoples who have lived in the highlands of the North Caucasus region since prehistory. There is archaeological evidence of historical continuity dating back to 3000 BC, as well as evidence pointing to their ancestors' migration from the Fertile Crescent 10,000 through 8000 BC. And so basically, through archaeology, they're able to see that, perhaps in fact, these Nakh people's ancestors came from the Fertile Crescent going to the Caucasus. And it says the proto Northeast Caucasian language had many terms for agriculture, and Joanna Nichols has suggested that its speakers may have been involved in the development of agriculture in the Fertile Crescent and only later moved north to the Caucasus. According to Bernice Withrich's article, Peering into the Past with Words, Joanna Nichols showed that linguistic evidence indicates the ancestors of Nakh people migrated to the slopes of the Caucasus from the Fertile Crescent, where farming and raising sheep and cattle had been discovered. Nichols stated, the Nakh-Dagestani languages are the closest thing we have to a direct continuation of the cultural and linguistic continuity or community that gave rise to Western civilization. Anthropologist Henry Harpington of the University of Utah is impressed by her research. Joan Nichols holds that the Durzuks were descended from extremely ancient migrations from the Fertile Crescent to the Caucasus, perhaps due to population or political pressures back in the Fertile Crescent. Others who believe the so-called Urartu version, such as George and Nakh Badez and Amja Jonica, still holds that those original migrants contributed to both the genetic and cultural traits of the modern English and Chechenians, but that the primary ancestors were Nakh-speaking migrants from what became Northeast Urartu. So again, the English have 89% of J2 Y-DNA, which is the highest known frequency in the world, and J2 is closely associated with the Fertile Crescent. So what's fascinating about there may being a connection between the Nakh people and the Fertile Crescent is that we could connect this with the Sumerians. We know that the Nakh people spoke a non-Semitic and non-Indo-European language. They spoke a Caucasian language, specifically a Northeast Caucasian Uru-Uratrian language. And this is from the Oxford Handbook of Ancient Anatolia, and it says, the Uru-Uratrian as a whole shared a yet earlier common ancestor with some of the numerous, comparatively obscure languages of the Caucasus is not improbable. And modern Caucasian languages are conventionally divided into southern, northwestern, and northeastern families. Georgian, for example, belongs to the southern family. Dankoff and Starstrom in the most thorough attempt at finding a linkage yet published, have argued that Hurrian is a branch of the Eastern Caucasian family. This would make it a distinct relative of such modern languages as Chechenian, Avar, Lak, and Uyed. And this is a English translation from Russian dealing with the Chechenians and the English in Hurrian. And so it says, of the peoples existing in our time, the Chechenians and English are the closest to the Hurru or the Hurrian Uratrian in terms of language. And I have underlined in blue the source and the ISBN number. And here's another source in German, though, translated from German, and the ISBN number is underlined in blue. And so it says, the long-standing assumptions about the connections of Hurrian and Uratrian with the Caucasian languages have received serious confirmation thanks to the connected correspondences indicated in the Northeast Caucasian languages, and especially the Vanak. And of course, the Vanak are the Chechenian and English and Nakh peoples. That's just another way of saying it. So the Sumerians also spoke a non-Semitic and non-Indo-European language. I feel like a lot of people don't know this, but this should be stressed. The Sumerians were not a Semitic people. They did not speak a Semitic language. They were not an Indo-European people. They did not speak an Indo-European language. These population of people were non-Semitic and non-Indo-European. As a matter of fact, many linguists believe that the Sumerians may have spoken a Caucasian language, specifically related to Northeast Caucasian language like Hurru-Uratrian, which is very interesting. Most historians have suggested that Sumer was first partially settled between 5,500 and 4,000 BC by a West Asian people who spoke the Sumerian language, a non-Semitic and non-Indo-European agglutinative language isolate, in contrast to its Semitic neighbors. So this is from Ancient History Encyclopedia, titled The Hurrians, and it says, Encyclopedia of Ancient History. Typologically, Hurrian is an agglutinating language with ergative grammar, unlike Indo-European and Semitic languages, but like the Sumerian language. Very interesting. This is from Archaeology Archive, who were the Hurrians, and it says, but Piotr Mikulski, an Assyrianologist at the University of Michigan, notes that Hurrian, like Sumerian, is a language unrelated to Semitic or Indo-European tongues that dominated the region during and after the 3rd millennium BC. And this is from lexical matches between Sumerian and Hurrian possible historical scenarios. And so it says, the paper deals with lexical matches between two ancient Near Eastern languages, Sumerian and Hurrian or Urartu, namely several basic terms like hand, rain, etc. Lexical borrows from Sumerian into Urartu, or vice versa, genetic relation between Sumerian and Hurrian for prehistoric language shift adoption by a Hurrian or closely related group of the Sumerian language, or vice versa. Sumerian is a language spoken in southern Mesopotamia, modern Iraq. Its earliest cuneiform attestation dates from the late 4th or early 3rd millennium BC. It functioned as a living language until the late 3rd or early 2nd millennium BC. The Hurrian linguistic family consists of two closely related languages, Hurrian with several dialects and Urartu. Historically, Hurrian was spoken in the southeast of present-day Turkey, in northern Syria, and northern Iraq, at least from the second half of the 3rd millennium to the end of the 2nd millennium BC. Urartu is attested in the 1st millennium BC as a language of the Urartu Empire, present-day Armenia and neighboring areas. For the pre-literate period, it is natural to associate the Urartu people with the Kura-Araxes culture, early Trans-Caucasian. And so this is another source. Sumerians had connections with the Caucasus, and it says the Hurrian Urartu language family consists of two closely related languages, Hurrian with several dialects and Urartu. Judging by historical evidence, the Hurrian language was spoken in the southeastern of modern Turkey, in northern Syria and northern Iraq, at least from the second half of the 3rd millennium to the end of the 2nd millennium BC. Hurrian and Urartu, like Sumerian, are languages of an agglutinative and ergative structure, which typologically brings them closer to Sumerian and opposes the Indo-European and Semitic languages of the ancient Near East. The greatest Orientalist of the 20th century, Igor Denkov, and the greatest comparative linguist, Sergei Starstrom, connected the Hurrian Urartu languages with the North Caucasian Nakh languages. Hurrian is correlated with the Kura-Araxes archaeological culture presented at the beginning of the 4th through 3rd millennium BC in the South Caucasus and adjacent regions of the Middle East. Some of the Sumerians withdrew and migrated to the Caucasus, where they adopted the Para-Urartu language, and then those whom we know as Hurrians and Urartuans are ethnic Sumerians who switched to Hurrian and Urartu, but retained in the language a few basic words of their original language. So we do see a possible link with the Nakh language and the Sumerians, but what could solidify the connection between the Nakh people and the Sumerians? And the only way to do that is to use haplogroups. And here's a perfect study dealing with the Sumerians. It's called In Search of the Genetic Footprints of Sumerians, a survey of Y chromosome and mtDNA variation in the Marsh Arabs of Iraq. So it says, the Marsh Arabs are considered the population with the strongest link to the ancient Sumerians. And this is what makes them very important when it comes to studying about ancient Sumerians. Popular tradition, however, considers the Marsh Arabs as a foreign group of unknown origin. And this paper will deal with whether the Marsh Arabs are foreign or ancient or descendants of ancient Sumerians. So, evidence of genetic stratification ascribable to the Sumerian development was provided by the Y chromosome data, where the J1-page 08 branch reveals a local expansion, also contemporary with the Sumerian city-state period that characterized southern Mesopotamia. On the other hand, a more ancient background shared with northern Mesopotamia is revealed by the less represented Y chromosome lineage J1-M267 Furthermore, a prevalent Middle Eastern ancestry of the modern population of the marshes of southern Iraq implies that if the Marsh Arabs are descendants of the ancient Sumerians, also the Sumerians were most likely autochthonous, meaning indigenous, and not of Indian or South Asian ancestry. Because some people believe that Sumerians were like Dravidians, but that's not the case according to the studies. So it says only two groups of populations arrived later, and in larger number leaved historical records. Sumerian and Semitic groups, and as you can see, it distinguished Sumerian and Semitic as two different groups. Anyways, the Sumerians who spoke an isolated language, not correlated with any linguistic family, are the most ancient group living in the region for which we have historical evidence. They occupied the delta between the two rivers in the southern part of the present Iraq, one of the oldest inhabited wetland environments. The Semitic group were semi-nomadic people who spoke a Semitic language and lived in the northern area of the Syro-Arabian desert, breeding small animals. From here they reached Mesopotamia, where they settled among the pre-existing populations, the Semitic people more numerous in the north, and the Sumerians more represented in the south. After having absorbed the pre-existing populations, melted their cultures, laying a basis of the Western civilization. So basically this whole section right here just basically broke down the difference between the Sumerians and the Semitic peoples, that these are in fact two different peoples, two different cultures, the way they lived, the areas that they lived, and so on. So it says, the ancient inhabitants of the marsh areas were Sumerians, who were the first to develop an urban civilization some 5,000 years ago. The second hypothesis posits that an advancement of the Sumerian civilization was the result of human migrations from the mountainous area of northeast Mesopotamia to the southern marshes of Iraq, with ensuing assimilation of the previous populations. Details such as home architecture, particular arched reed buildings, food gathering, grazing water buffaloes, trapping birds, and spearing fish, rice cultivation, and means of transportation, slender bitumen-covered wooden boats called tar-adad are documented as still being practiced by the indigenous population locally named Madan or Marsh Arabs. These, and just to pause right there, it's very interesting to see how basically the same culture and same way of life that the ancient Sumerians were living is still being practiced by the modern day population of these Marsh Arabs in southern Iraq. So this also could be evidence that these are the same people. But anyways, continuing, it says, this village lifestyle, which has remained unchanged for 7 millennia, suggests a possible link between the present-day Marsh inhabitants and ancient Sumerians. However, popular tradition considers the Marsh Arabs as a foreign group of unknown origin, which I would say that that I would agree with the latter that the Marsh Arabs are descendants of the ancient Sumerians based on these cultural connections. But anyways, it says Haplogroup J accounts for 55.1% of Iraqi sample, reaching 84.6% in the Marsh Arabs, one of the highest frequencies reported so far. So Marsh Arabs have an extremely high amount of haplogroup J. It's very interesting. Unlike the Iraqi samples, which displays a rough equal proportion of J1-M267 at 56.4% and J2-M16172 at 43.6%, almost all Marsh Arab J chromosomes, 96%, belong to the J1-M267 clade, and in particular to sub haplogroup J1-page 08. And also, there's even haplogroup E found among the Marsh Arabs. I'll go ahead and read that, even though our focus is on J. But haplogroup E, which characterizes 6.3% of Marsh Arabs and 13.6% of Iraqis, is represented by E-M123 in both groups and E-M78 mainly in the Iraqis. So that's also fairly interesting. Two hypotheses have been proposed for the origin of Marsh Arabs. They could be Aboriginal inhabitants of Mesopotamia correlated to the old Sumerians, which I would agree. The analysis carried out on the mtDNA and Y chromosome of the Iraqi Marsh Arabs, a population living in the Tigris-Euphrates marshlands, have shown a prevalent autochthonous Middle Eastern component both in the male and female gene pools. So they are indigenous. A higher male than female homogeneity mainly determined by the co-occurrence of socio-cultural and genetic factors, whereas most frequent J1-page 808 branch reveals a local recent migration about 4,000 years ago. Although the Y chromosome age estimates deserve caution, particularly when samples are small and standard errors large, it is interesting to note that these estimates overlap the city-state period which characterized southern Mesopotamia and is attested to by numerous ancient Sumerian cities: Lagash, Uruk, Eridu, and Larsh. So basically, there does seem to be a genetic overlap in the time period when these city-states of Sumerians began with the Marsh Arabs and haplogroup J. In conclusion, our data shows that the modern Marsh Arab of Iraq harbor mtDNAs and Y chromosomes that are predominantly of Middle Eastern origin. Moreover, a Middle Eastern ancestral origin of the modern population of the marshes of southern Iraq implies that if the Marsh Arabs are descendants of the ancient Sumerians, also Sumerians are not of Indian or Southern Asian ancestry. So Marsh Arabs are our best bets for the ancient Sumerians, I would say. So if Marsh Arabs truly do descend from the Sumerians, then this would prove that the Sumerians had haplogroup J. Furthermore, if Sumerians had haplogroup J, this could link them with the Nakh peoples. Linguistically speaking, there is a high chance that they are linked when it comes to the Sumerian and Caucasian languages. But with that being said, the story of the Nakh people coming from Mesopotamia to the Caucasus could be true that we see in archaeology and even their oral history. So everything is lining up. But perhaps the most interesting thing about all of this is the highest concentration of haplogroup J being among them. I think that's extremely powerful. And remember, again, haplogroup J2A4B*M67 comprise 51 through 79% of the Y chromosomes in the English and 3 Chechenian populations, Northeast Caucasus Nakh linguistic group. Finally, Haplogroup J1*M267 comprise 44 through 99% of the Avar, Dargans, the Kittaiks, the Kabachi, and Lusians, the Southeastern Caucasus Dagestan linguistic group. And that was from parallel evolution of genes and languages in the Caucasus region. Remember, these Caucasian populations have the highest amounts of haplogroup J, whether it's J1, as you can see right here, J1, here are the populations, and here are the references. And here's J2, here are the populations, and here are the references. The English have 89% of J2 Y DNA, which is the highest known frequency in the world, and J2 is closely associated with the Fertile Crescent. Haplogroup J accounts for 55.1% of the Iraqi samples, reaching 84.6% in the Marsh Arabs, one of the highest frequencies reported so far. Unlike the Iraqi sample, which displays a roughly equal proportion of J1-M267 at 56.4% and J2-M172 at 43.6%, almost all Marsh Arab chromosomes is 96% belonging to the J1-M267 clade, and in particular to sub-haplogroup J1-page 08. And of course, that is from In Search of the Genetic Footprints of Sumerians, a survey of Y chromosome and mtDNA variation in the Marsh Arabs of Iraq. So it's interesting how some of the highest forms of haplogroup J are basically among non-Semitic speakers, both in ancient and modern times. The Nakh people having 51 through 79%, the Dagestan having 44 through 99%, basically 100, and the Marsh Arabs having around like 96%. So although the Marsh, now here's one caveat that I want to make that is actually pretty important to keep in mind. So although the Marsh Arabs today speak a Semitic language, they speak, Arabic, this just confirms the fact that populations with haplogroup J adopted Semitic. If the Marsh Arabs are indeed descendants of Sumerians who spoke a non-Semitic language, then how do Marsh Arabs speak a Semitic language today? At some point in time, their ancestors must have adopted their Semitic tongue from Semitic populations. I feel like it's highly probable that haplogroup J started off as a non-Semitic speakers, and particularly of the Proto-Caucasian speakers, and that ancient populations like the Sumerians would have been one of those non-Semitic groups with haplogroup J speaking a Northeast Caucasian language and adopted it from the Semites that were around them. And at that point, it would have been the Akkadians. So now let's look into the phenotype. The phenotype of the Sumerians is very interesting. They left artwork of themselves of how they looked. They left quite a bit of art of how they looked, from statues to murals and little figurines. But from what I could tell when looking at their statues, looking at their artwork, is that they would have had an Armenoid phenotype, and this is even confirmed when it comes to their human remains. That was Armenoid. So let's get into that. Armenoid, just to do a refresher: short-headed and high skull type with fleshy features, a flat occiput and hooked nose, often black-haired with light brown skin, common in mountainous regions of Asia Minor, especially Armenia and Anatolia, was found in ancient Sumerians. So here is a Sumerian statue right next to a Chechnyan. I believe that's a Chechnyan or an English. But you can see, to me, there is striking resemblance from obviously to skin tone, hair, beard, etc. Here are Sumerian murals. This is from the southern Iraq of the Standard of This is another stone carving of Sumerian soldiers. And right here is actually a Kurd, and right here is an Armenian, and this is also an Armenian woman. And just by looking at the features of these Sumerians and these Armenian and Kurdish people, is that phenotypically they look very similar, having, as the Armenoid phenotype is, more of a hooked nose type, as you can see with the Sumerians, or a triangular nose, which fits along with the Armenians. I would say that Sumerians would look a lot like the Armenoid peoples. Here's more figurines. They even classify it as the Armenoid. And here is a Kurdish man, a Kurd, two Kurdish men. And just judging by the way that the Sumerians chose to depict themselves, from the way that they shaped the nose to the curvature of the head, I would say that it does fit that of these Armenoid-like peoples that still reside in the Middle East today. Here is another Sumerian statue, as you can see right here, uniform. But obviously they over and over again purposely depicted themselves with this almost hooked or triangular nose, which fits exactly with that of this Armenian man. This is Armenian, where we get the term the Armenoid type. And their person to me seems to be a very interesting match between the two. And here is a Chechnyan or an Englishman, got offline, and his features does match that of a typical Sumerian statue. And this would make sense if Sumerians are indeed the ancestors of, or ethnic group related to, the Chechnyans and English. And here is a Kurdish man with his features being no different than this of this Sumerian tablet, having the triangular or hooked nose, and I would say it fits perfectly. So, to conclude, I would say that there is indeed a connection between Sumerians and peoples of the Caucasus, or the Armenoid peoples, and that they did indeed share the same language, which was non-Semitic, but in fact Caucasian, and that they shared a genetic link, being Haplogroup J, and they also shared a phenotype, which is, of course, Armenoid. But this is where we end the Nakh, Sumerians, and Haplogroup J. Togarmah, the English, the Chechnyans, and the Armenians. What I find interesting about the Nakh peoples, Chechnyans and English, is that they have a biblical tradition of descending from Togarmah. Caucasus, or Caucasus, was the supposed ancestor of the Chechnyans and English, according to Georgian chronicles. And as you can see right here, parents Togarmah, great grandparent Japheth. Anyways, Caucasus or Caucasus was the supposed ancestor of Chechnyans and English, according to the Georgian chronicles. The legend has it that he was a son of Togarmah, and thus the brother of Heos, Maviokos, Lekos, referred to as the ancestor of Lesgic peoples, Heros, Kartelos, known to be the ancestor of Georgian people, and Egros took their origin. Caucasus' son Derzup which we mention quite often, is said to be the ancestor of the Chechens and Ingish. And here is actually, one of the Caucasian people's portraits of this this tradition of the sons of Togarmah or Togarmos in their tongue. And so here's just a chart showing it from Noah to Japheth to Gomer to Togarmah to Caucasus, his son literally being named Caucasus, which will of course be the Caucasians. So it says, according to Leonti Meveroni, the 11th century Georgian chronicler, the word Caucasian is derived from the Nakh people's ancestor Kavuskus. Derzuk was mentioned by the chronologies as the most distinguished among the descendants of Kavusks, who led his people, the Derzuks, into the mountains, where they would become the ancestor of today's Vanak peoples. Before his death, Togarmah, divided the country among his sons, with Caucasus, the eldest and most noble, receiving the central Caucasus. Caucasus engendered the Chechen tribes and his descendants, the Rzuk, who took residence in a mountainous region later called Dzukesterznia after him, established a strong state in the 4th and 3rd centuries BC. The Rzuks and Nakh were remnants of the Uratrians. The Rzuks were also known as the Hurrian tribe. The origin of Chechnya population, and it says, according to Letoni Meveroni, the 11th century Georgian chronicler, the word Caucasian is derived from the Nakh ancestor Kavuskus. According to George and Nakh of Illinois State University, the Vanaks are the ancient natives of the Caucasus. It is noteworthy that according to the genealogical table drawn up by Leonti Meveroni, the legendary forefather of the Vanaks was Kavuskus, hence the name Kavuskians, Caucasians, one of the ethnocons met in the ancient Georgian written sources, significantly signifying the ancestors of the Chechens and Ingish. As appears from above, the Vanaks, at least by name, are presented as the most Caucasian people of all the Caucasians. Caucasus, Kavuskians, in the Georgian historical tradition. American linguist Joanne Nichols has used language to connect the modern people of the Caucasus region to the ancient farmers of the Fertile Crescent, and her research suggests that farmers of the region were Proto-Nakh-Dangestanis. Nichols stated, the Nakh-Dangestani language are the closest thing we have to a direct continuation of the cultural and linguistic community that gave rise to Western civilization. Derzuks in the Georgian chronicles and the Armenian chronicles. Ancestors of the modern Chechens and Ingish were known as Derzuks. Before his death, Togarmah divided the country amongst his sons with Tarvoskus Caucasus, the eldest and most noble, receiving the central Caucasus. Kavuskus engendered the Chechen tribes and his descendants, Derzuk, who took residence in the mountainous region, later called Derzukstenia, after him, established a strong state in the 4th and 3rd centuries BC. And so this is from the book, The Chechens, a handbook. And it says, the Georgian chronicles of Leonti Meveroni, which refer to events that go back as far as the pre-Christian era, include the first written record of the Nakh progenitors of the Nochi. According to Mevrani, the Nakh were descendants of Togarmah, the mythical progenitor of the Caucasian peoples, who moved together with his sons to the Caucasus from Assyria. Before his death, Togarmah divided the country amongst his sons, with Tarvoskus, the eldest and most noble, receiving the central Caucasus. Tarvoskus engendered the Chechenian tribes and his descendants. Durazuk, who took residence in the mountainous region, later called Durazukstenia after him, established a strong state in the 4th and 3rd centuries BC. The Japhetic theory of the Soviet linguistic N.Y. Marsh proposed that all native language families in the Caucasus, including Northwest, Northeast, and Southern Caucasian or South Caucasian, belong to the same Japhetic language group, which in linguistics implied common ancestry. And I actually would agree with that. It would make a lot of sense for the Caucasian language to basically be from Japheth rather than Shem or Ham. Caucasian is likely a Japhetic language. J. Nichols proposed that the Nakh language family is long indigenous to the Caucasus, suggested by fairly seamless archaeological continuity for the last 8,000 years or more in central Dagestani or central Dagestan. This is also reinforced by the distribution of loan words from ancient Mesopotamia into early Nakh-Dagestani. The structure of the Nakh-Dagestani language family, with the greatest divergence within and between branches laying in their southern reaches, would suggest that pre-Proto-Nakh-Dagestanis spread into the Caucasus from the southwest. And so this is from the Venex, the Chechen and English book, and it says, "It is interesting to note that an opinion of the Caucasian unity based on the community of origin come into existence in the Caucasus very long ago." Litoni Mevrani, a prominent Georgian author of the 11th century, begins his work on the history of ancient Georgia with the mythical times of the Caucasus, and gives a genealogical tree of the Caucasus peoples, representing the Armenians, Georgians, Vanex, Dagestani tribes, and others, as the descendants of legendary Togarmah, their common ancestor. According to Mevrani, the descendants of Togarmah, inhabiting all over the Caucasus, lived in friendship and came out together against the outer enemies to defeat their native land. To defend their native land. The Vanex, as it is already known to the reader, are the ancient natives of the Caucasus. It is noteworthy that according to the genealogical table drawn up by Litoni Mevrani, the legendary forefather of the Vanex was Kavoskus, hence the name Kavoskians, one of the ethnicons met in the ancient Georgian written sources, signifying the ancestor of the Chechenians in English. As appears from above, the Vanex, at least by name, are represented by the most Caucasian people of all the Caucasians, Caucasus, Kavoskians, in the Georgian historical tradition. According to the version of Litoni Mevrani, Kavoskus and his brothers Liek migrated from Transcaucasia to the uninhabited northern Caucasus and occupied the territory from the mountains to the south of the Volga. According to archaeological data, in the Bronze Age, the ancient Caucasian tribes inhabited not only the mountains of the North Caucasus, but also the lowlands going far into the steppe. So Nakh peoples, like the Chechens and English, have oral traditions that they come from Togarmah, son, his son specifically Caucasus. Now, this is very interesting because if you recall from previous videos, the Armenians are another people, of the Caucasus that have a tradition of descending from Togarmah, but their ancestor is named Haik the Great. Haik is the legendary patriarch and founder of the Armenian nation. His story is told in the History of Armenia attributed to the Armenian historian Moses of Caron. In Moses of Caron's account, Haik, son of Togarmah, had a child named Amnek, or Amranek, while he was living in Babylon. After the arrogant titan Bel made himself king over all, Haik immigrated to the region near Mount Ararat. Haik relocated near Mount Ararat with an extended household of at least 300 and settled there, founding a village he named Hayastan. Bel decided to march against him with a massive force, but Haik was warned ahead of time by Kedmos of his impending approach. He assembled his own army along the shores of Lake Ban and told them that they must defeat and kill Bel or die trying to do so, rather than become his slaves. Haik and his people, from the time of their forefathers, Noah and Japheth, had migrated south towards the warmer lands near Babylon. But proud Haik refused to submit to Bel. As soon as his son, Amranek, was born, Haik rose up and led his people northward into the land of Ararat. Now that's very, very interesting, very almost ironic, because basically, from the sound of things, Haik's people were in the Caucasus at first, and then they came into Mesopotamia, but because of Bel, they then left Mesopotamia. So it's like a back and forth migration. And that kind of does fit with the archaeology of the Nakh peoples. Like many people are saying, it seems like first the ancestors of the Nakh were in the Fertile Crescent, and then they went into the Caucasus. So I find that to be very ironic in a way, how this story of Haik seems to fit that. And here's from Ancient History Encyclopedia, Armenian mythology, and it says, "This is the story of Haik and Bel, and places the origins of the Armenian people as the descendants of the biblical Noah via his son Japheth. Haik, a descendant of Japheth and noted archer, hence his later association with Hurrian, rebelled one day against Bel, the evil and repressive Babylonian tyrant, and returned back, there's the key word, back to his homeland around Mount Ararat in ancient Armenia." So with him returning back means he came from the Caucasus first and then went to Mesopotamia and then went back and forth migration. Anyways, Bel followed Haik and his relations so that a mighty battle followed, in which Bel was killed. Haik then gave his name to his descendants, the Hay people, and the name of the region of Armenia in the Armenian language, Hayastan. And this is from Insight on the Scriptures, Volume 2, and it says Togarmah. Many commentators connect Togarmah with the Armenians. The Armenians themselves traditionally claim to be descended from Haik, son of Togarmah. Ancient Greek writers speak of the Armenians as famed for their horses and mules. So one thing that I find interesting about the story of Haik in connection to the Chechens and the English is that the story is very similar to their history and what we find in archaeology. The story of Haik is basically that the descendants of Togarmah, i.e. Haik and his family, started off in Mesopotamia, the Fertile Crescent. Then they went to the Caucasus with some of their people staying. So that sounds very familiar. The Chechens and the English, one of the Nakh peoples who lived in the highlands of the North Caucasus region since prehistory. There is archaeological evidence of historical continuity dating back to 3000 BC, as well as evidence pointing to their ancestors' migration from the Fertile Crescent 10,000 through 8000 BC. According to Litoni Mevaroni, the 11th century Georgian chronicler, the word Caucasian is derived from the Venec ancestor Kavoskas. According to Professor George Anek Bedez of Ilia State University, the Venecs are the ancient natives of the Caucasus. It is noteworthy that, according to the genealogical table drawn up by Litoni Mevaroni, the legendary forefather of the Venecs was Kavoskas, hence the name Kavoskians. One of the ethnicons met in the ancient Georgian written sources, signifying the ancestors of the Chechens and English. As appears from the above, the Venecs, at least by name, are represented as the most Caucasian people of all the Caucasians, Caucasus, Kavoskas, Kavoskians, in the Georgian historical tradition. In an article in Science magazine, Bernice Worthrich states that American linguist Dr. Jonah Nichols has used language to connect modern people of the Caucasus region to the ancient farmers of the Fertile Crescent, and that her research suggests that farmers of the region were Proto-Nakh Dagestanis. Nichols is quoted as stating that the Nakh Dagestani languages are the closest thing we have to a direct continuation of the cultural and linguistic community that gave rise to Western civilization. Jonah Nicole holds that the Darzuks were descended from extremely ancient migrations from the Fertile Crescent to the Caucasus, perhaps due to population or political pressures back in the Fertile Crescent. Very interesting. Kind of fits with the story of Haik and Bel, political pressures. Anyways, others who believe, well, actually, that's good right there, dealing with just the fact that they were in the Fertile Crescent going back and forth. So, according to Bernice Withrich's article, Peering into the Past with Words, Jonah Nichols showed that linguistic evidence indicates the ancestors of the Nakh people migrated to the slopes of the Caucasus from the Fertile Crescent, where farming and raising sheep and cattle had been discovered. So, again, just showing you this migration, they're going from the Fertile Crescent into the Caucasus, much like how Haik's story is set. A cuneiform style of writing and runic type inscriptions are found on ancient monuments in Chechnya, some dating back to the 3rd millennium BC. However, no serious work has been done to interpret them. Nakh has roots that can be traced to some languages of ancient Mesopotamia. There is a general consensus that the Hurrian, Urartu and Nakh Dagestani language families are connected. I. M. Dinkov and S. A. Starsman in 1986 have demonstrated more than 100 common roots between the two language groups. This also connects with the high likelihood that Sumerians are just a branch of Caucasians related to the Chechens and the English peoples, basically Northeast Caucasian peoples. This is from Sumerians, had connections with the Caucasus, and it says, some of the Sumerians withdrew and migrated to the Caucasus, where they developed the Proto-Urartian language, and then those whom we know as Hurrians and Urartians are ethnic Sumerians who switched to Hurrian and Urartian, but retained in their language a few basic words of their original language. So the story of Haik the Armenian, along with the oral history and anthropology of the Chechens and English, could be true. And what I find to be fascinating is that it all pretty much connects with one another. Furthermore, keep in mind that Sumerians, Chechenians, and English, all these Caucasian groups, they all have high amounts of haplogroup J. The English have 89% of J2 live DNA, which is the highest known frequency in the world, and J2 is closely associated with the Fertile Crescent. Again, haplogroup J2A4B *M67 comprise 51 through 79% of the Y chromosomes in the English and 3 Chechenian populations, Northeast Caucasus, Nakh linguistic group. Finally, haplogroup J1 *M267 comprise 44 through 99% of Southeast Caucasus, Dagestani linguistic group. Haplogroup J accounts for 55.1% of the Iraqi samples, reaching 84.6% in the Marsh Arabs, one of the highest frequencies reported so far. Skipping down right here, it says, almost all Marsh Arab J chromosomes, 96%, belong to the J1-M267 clade. One thing seems to be certain, that the peoples of the Caucasus, Armenians, Chechenians, English, Georgians, and others, from all their oral history and even in anthropology, everything points to them being the descendants of Togarmah. Togarmah is a figure in the Table of Nations in Genesis 10, the list of the descendants of Noah that represents the peoples known to the ancient Hebrews. Togarmah is among the descendants of Japheth and is thought to represent some people located in Anatolia. When dealing with his sons, his children, according to tradition or heritage and understanding of other peoples, is that you had Haik, Caucasus, and Keratos, and then you had grandchildren as well. Caucasus or Caucasus was the supposed ancestor of Chechenians and English, according to Georgian chronologies or chronicles. Armenian and Georgian tradition. Another Togarmah, this one being the son of both Tyrus and Gomer, is mentioned by Armenian Moses of Caron and Georgian Letoni Mevroni, who regarded Togarmah as the founder of their nations, along with other Caucasian peoples. According to Moses of Caron's History of Armenia and to Letoni Mevroni's medieval Georgian chronicles, Togarmah was thought to have lived in Babylon before he received the land between the 2 seas and 2 mountains, i.e. the Caucasus, in his possession. He then settled near Mount Ararat and divided his land among his sons. Haik, first son of Togarmah, inherited Mount Ararat and founded the Armenian nation. Kartolos settled in northeast from Ararat, founder of Kartli, who united other brothers and founded the Georgian nation. And then Togarmah, according to various Armenian and Georgian and Caucasian traditions, had other sons that link up, of course, with modern Caucasian populations with their ancient names. I'm going to skip down to the last 2 that are highlighted in blue and yellow. There's another son called Herlos, settled in the eastern part of Ararat, and then Caucasus or Kavoskas, that we talked about with the Chechens and English, settled beyond the Caucasus range. So that's basically the Caucasian tradition of Togarmah, which would match up and does make a lot of sense. Also, if the peoples of the Caucasus are the descendants of Togarmah, then it's highly likely that haplogroup J is from Togarmah as well, since haplogroup J is a Caucasian marker in origin. Both Georgian hunter-gatherer samples were associated with haplogroup J with Keratos, belonging to the sub-haplogroup J2A. In a study exploring J haplogroups and 445 individuals from Eurasia. J2A was found at highest frequency in Georgia and Iraq, and we talked about Iraq with the Marsh Arabs, descendants of Sumerians, non-Semitic speakers. Anyways, it is intriguing that both the mitochondrial and Y chromosome haplogroups in our ancient Georgian samples have been associated with the Neolithicization of Europe. This tentatively suggests a genetic link between Georgian hunter-gatherers and early European migrants from the Near East. And of course, we know about the Armenians being connected with the Yamnaya and Proto-European populations. So this is where we end Togarmah, the English, the Chechens, and the Armenians. What have we learned so far? 1. Haplogroup J anciently is associated with Nakh, Dagestan, Northeast Caucasians. 2. The Nakh, English, and Chechens have the highest amount of haplogroup J in the world. 3. The Nakh have connections to the Fertile Crescent. 4. The Sumerians may have been a Nakh-related people. 5. The Sumerians may have had haplogroup J because of the Marsh Arabs, who may be their descendants. They also have a very high amount of haplogroup J. But 6. The Sumerians were a non-Semitic people. And 7. According to Caucasian tradition, it's believed that Togarmah is actually the ancestor of the English, Chechens, Armenians, and other related peoples of the Caucasus. So in summary, so far with everything that we've gathered, I would say that haplogroup J in origin is more associated with Caucasian populations, which is why it's found among ancient Caucasian remains. Even outside of the Caucasus, in the Sumerians, it's likely that they were carriers of haplogroup J. They too may have spoken a Caucasian language. Even to this day, modern Caucasians have the highest amounts of haplogroup J, and ironically, the Marsh Arabs, who are believed to be the descendants from Sumerians, have a very high amount of J. Furthermore, there is archeological and linguistic evidence that the Nakh people were associated with the Fertile Crescent and even with the Sumerians, all of these groups carrying haplogroup J but being non-Semitic. This leads me to believe that haplogroup J could belong to Japheth, but which son or grandson of Japheth could haplogroup J belong to? Luckily, that question was answered when we looked into the oral tradition of people with the highest amounts of haplogroup J, like the Chechens and the English. They and many other Caucasians have an oral account that they come from Togarmah. This is, of course, fascinating because Armenians believe this too, and they have a tradition that mirrors the Chechens and the English, that they were first in the Fertile Crescent and migrated to the Caucasus, or vice versa, being in the Caucasus and migrating to the Fertile Crescent and then back to the Caucasus. And then the Armenians have a story with the Haik, their forefather, going from the Caucasus to Mesopotamia and then leaving Mesopotamia because of Bel, who was the king of Akkad at the time, and fleeing back to the Caucasus. And I find that to be very interesting how these traditions, these stories, and even in archaeology and language, it's starting to connect, and of course with genetics. So, with everything that we've covered so far, I would say that haplogroup J could very well be Togarmah. And this is where we end haplogroup J equals Japheth, part 2. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the video, and click the bell if you enjoyed it. And please leave a comment for any questions you might have. And don't forget to follow any of my social media accounts that I mentioned at the beginning of the video. And with all of that out of the way, have a great day and shalom.